And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome to Open Connection. I'm your host, Rupert Businesses. Our show today comes to you from the traditional and unceded territory of the Tsimshian people. The Kalum Land and Resource Development Plan encompasses 2.2 million hectares of northwestern British Columbia. The plan represents the consensus reached by the participants of the Kalum LRMP planning table and the provincial government decision regarding these three areas where participants were unable to reach an agreement. On today's Open Connection, we open our archives to bring you this story from 2001.
The LRMP process began back in 1991 with the formation of a Community Resources Board. Back then, they were into what was called the Thunderbird Plan, as it began with an area near Lake Else Lake and expanded to include areas outside the big tree farm licenses controlled by Skeena Cellulose and West Fraser Timber. That part of the plan is now known as Phase 1. Phase 2, begun in 1996, took in those TFLs. At the table were representatives of the forest industry, mining, environmentalists, municipal governments, and others, including local First Nations. With such a diverse group, coming to a consensus was no easy task, especially when there were so many things to consider.
The strategy with which the table defined to achieve that, one of them would be in areas identified for pine mushroom management, implement timber harvesting and silviculture strategies designed to maintain and enhance mushroom harvests. So that was done for all resource values, and there's multiple strategies involved in doing that. So it's quite a long process that all table members and all interests have to agree to that language.
O'Donoghue made those comments just over a year ago, shortly after the table had come to an agreement in principle, signifying they were into the home stretch. But there was still a long way to go and a lot of issues to cover before they'd arrive at the place they're at now. That is, a package of recommendations that will go to a series of public displays and open houses starting this weekend.
It's overwhelming. I mean, it is impossible. You can't expect to get every last person out there to be aware that the public review is even going on. You do the best as possible. As it is right now, we're doing this little television segment to hit the television viewers. It's in the newspaper, it'll be advertised. I have posters up, newsletters have gone out consistently throughout the whole process. And it has been up to table members as well to communicate to their individual constituents to let them know where it has been developing and what's been going on. That is part of the responsibility of table members, to help inform the public, because aside from going door to door, which is next to impossible cost-wise, you can only do as best as you can to reach the public.
The Kalum LRMP deals with the lands of the South Kalum Forest District. That's 2.3 million hectares of land and includes Terrace, Kitimat, Lake Else Lake, the Kitlope, and the tree farm licenses of Skeena Cellulose and West Fraser Timber. It does not include Nisga'a lands. And there was a lot of discussion over how much of that land would be made off-limits to the resource industry. The province's goal is to preserve 12% of BC's land mass, but in the South Kalum, that number was already up to 18% by the time Phase 2 began, and conservationists wanted more, up to 6% more. That was something that sent shock waves through the forest and mineral industries.
The majority of them were in highly mineralized area. Highly mineralized in the area, from what my knowledge is of the area. So therefore, I negotiated back through the process to an extra 0.2% on top of the 18%.
Right off the bat, we were sitting at 18% protected areas, and from a conservation perspective, there was very little room to sort of move. And so you're already bound by certain percentages and, of what you can hope to achieve out of the process. So yes, it was very tough.
In the end, the areas that everyone agreed to protect in the document going to the public totaled just over 18%. And while no one was popping champagne corks, everyone saw something they could agree to.
I think we're reasonably happy. I mean, of course, nobody I don't think is ever totally happy. Everybody always, gives up a little or loses a little, or however you want to say it. But I think overall we have a good document. I think we've done a lot of hard negotiations, come to a lot of hard, difficult decisions. And I think overall we've come up with a good document that has some impacts. Like I said, there always will be impacts, but I think we've kept them fairly minimum and still have a good document for the other resources.
Everybody argued to the best that they could, and they were, I think everybody is pretty much satisfied that their interests are accounted for as best they could be under the agreement. And I think the mining people will be, I think they will sign, they'll be happy with what we have.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Thank you for staying with us. Grizzly bears are an integral part of maintaining healthy ecosystems in BC because having a healthy population makes the province better able to sustain other species. Grizzly bears also play an important role in First Nations culture, as well as many tourism and recreational activities. Let us return to the archives with Val George.
The package of recommendations includes language on grizzly bear management and biodiversity, something that's received a lot of praise but was very tough to arrive at. Terrace City Councillor Val George, who was part of the process, says the initial language on protecting grizzly bears had the potential of costing hundreds of jobs, something he could never sign off.
My major recreational interests are hunting and fishing, and I'm a naturalist too, you know. So I mean, I'm very concerned about protecting, you know, the habitat for these for the animals and grizzly bears included. But you know, I'm also extremely concerned about any economic impact it would have. So the potential of losing 300-400 jobs was just totally unacceptable. It was totally unacceptable to me personally, and I knew that it would be totally unacceptable to the community that I represent. Well, you know, with a tremendous amount of discussion and give and take here, and you know, we've managed to come to some consensus here where the economic impact of managing grizzly bears is going to be relatively minimal.
In the end, there were 3 areas the board could not agree on. The Upper Sioux Channel, which is an area along the Douglas Channel. The argument there is over visual quality objectives. Milligat Creek in the Upper Copper River area east of Terrace. Environmentalists want it protected. And the Giltoys Inlet southeast of Kitimat. That's an area south of the Gitnadoix River, another proposed protected area.
It's close enough to Kitimat, and it has that marine component, and then the big link to the Gitnadoix. That's important, you know, from the conservation perspective, because if you have these little fragmented protected areas with no connectivity, you have very little opportunity for wildlife movement and, you know, just the biodiversity.
Those areas will be before the public at a series of forums about to take place. And it's at these meetings that you get your chance to say what you think about the entire plan.
So that the public has the opportunity to get their last 2 bits in on it, or any concerns that they felt were not appropriately addressed. And then at this point, we would like them to provide us that feedback. The deadline for that, for this particular process, is February 12th. To provide us that feedback, and they can do it by writing, by telephone, by email, in order to raise any concerns that they think we have missed.
This is going to have a very considerable impact on their lives, actually, for the future. And so I think that the public really should get very interested at this point and come out and give us their input.
What impact will the LRMP have? It's pretty much all speculation at this point.
There's a number of areas that will have impacts on the industry from a cost point of view, either a direct cost or a cost related to that you'll need more planning and more manpower, and that results in higher costs. But some of those are very difficult to assess at this point, and until we probably have been into the plan for 5 or 6 years or somewhere in that range, we probably won't really know what the total impact is.
The public input phase lasts until mid-February. Then the recommendations are finalized and sent to Victoria. And as the Kalum LRMP process comes to its end, a similar process is just starting up on the north coast in an area dubbed the Great Bear Rainforest by the International Environmental Movement. Prepare for more fireworks.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome back to Open Connection. The BC Chamber of Commerce is the largest business association in British Columbia, representing 100 chambers of commerce and boards of trade and 3,600 businesses of every size and from every sector and region of the province. Let us return to the archives as Yvonne Simmons shares how businesses are doing in Prince Rupert.
Just recently, the Prince Rupert and District Chamber of Commerce reported that its records show that 52 businesses in the city have closed since April of 1997. The Chamber says closures have affected almost every sector of the community's economy.
If you look at the tracking, we're looking at the contractors, the electrical contractors, industrial suppliers, welding shops, realtors. It's every sector we've seen a change, a drop.
The number of businesses that have closed in Prince Rupert is high in my opinion, but considering the economic situation in northern BC and the Pacific Northwest in particular, it's not an unreasonable number. What I hope will happen with these sorts of closures, if they're in areas that are requiring continued support, an existing business or a new business will see an opportunity with those closures to come in and fill that void in the market.
The steady decline can be seen in the number of trade licenses left in the city. According to city records, in 1997, there were a total of 1,300 licenses in the community. In 1998, that number dropped to 1,272. At the start of 1999, it dropped even further to 1,211, and in 2000, 1,157 were left. At the start of this year, it was about the same at 1,155 active licenses. One of the most recent victims is Grand Trunk Hobbies on 3rd Avenue.
The business is to a point where everybody else gets paid at the end of the month except me. I own all this stock here. I manage to sell enough each month to pay the bills, and there's nothing left for me. So it's just simply a case it's not a viable business anymore, so I'm going to go and try something else.
Walker blames a lot of his woes on a decreasing population.
It's just incredible. You just drive around in town and look at the apartment blocks. There's blocks of buildings that are empty, houses empty. It's a worrisome thing that the area, Prince Rupert area, just seems to be suffering from a mass migration of people. And if we're able to turn that around, we will. Then it'll come back. But right now, it's not good.
One of the things to keep in mind with this sort of downward pressure on business is the base of consumers that they have come to rely on has been going down over the years. I think the numbers that are being quoted now are over the last 3 or 5 years, and that trend has continued as the number of consumers has decreased across the region.
Kalinchuk says the decrease in population has had a twofold effect on the business community.
The base of consumers we talked about as being one area, but for business owners who are looking to retire or who are looking to just get out of that particular business for whatever reason, traditionally in a stable economy they would have some other route that they could take for turnover. The turnover on businesses in Prince Rupert and communities across the north has been that if I'm a business person and I'm looking to retire, there's nobody that is there who can either take the business over or purchase the business. So that's where we're seeing business closures higher than usual.
Now, not all is as bad as it looks, as there have been some business starts in the city over the last little while.
Just from a rough look of the business license permits, which is probably the closest way you're going to gauge, there's about 10 or 11 businesses that I see as sort of bona fide businesses that have started up new. I'm not counting the ones that some have replaced, and I haven't counted the businesses that closed and been replaced by someone as well.
One of the newer businesses in town is Warehouse, a consignment clothing store. Although it's hard to believe, not everybody is scared by the current state of the economy.
I just don't have the same sort of feeling that things are just total doom and gloom. I think things are going to turn around eventually. And some people say that when business is down, it's the best time to open a new business. So I'm going for it. with a couple of partners.
In order to ensure that no other businesses disappear, the Chamber of Commerce is pushing for a business retention and expansion strategy.
I think that's one of the things that we should be looking into. There's, I think, a variety of reasons, the economy of one of them for sure. But it's time. I think we should be looking at a business retention and expansion program to analyze some of these reasons and take the negative news and put it into something positive for a game plan.
The Terrace Economic Development Authority has already started work on a similar strategy.
The biggest purpose is just simply to get out to the local business community and ask them what kind of things they need to help them become more competitive here in Terrace. Stats say that 80% of new employment is created by existing firms.
The TEDA has already started the work of surveying local businesses and reports it is having an excellent response. As for applying the same program in Prince Rupert, well, at least one business likes the idea.
I'd welcome the support for sure, and I'd be willing to give my own input in terms of the experiences that we've gone through. Some support would be nice. It's I know the neighboring businesses are great. I mean, everyone is really supportive, and they offer their advice and so on, and let me know what's happening. And I think we look out for each other just in this neighborhood. But to feel like you're part of the larger business community, that would be really appreciated.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Trumpeter swans once nested over most of North America, but disappeared rapidly as civilization advanced westward. By the 1930s, fewer than 100 remained south of Canada. In this final segment of Open Connection, we return to the archives to the trumpeter swans of Lake Else Lake.
In the mid-1940s, a pair of trappers who lived at the north end of Lake Else Lake began feeding the trumpeter swans. In 1945, there were between 30 to 40 swans at the lake. Floyd Johnstone occasionally lent the trappers a hand.
Just started from that day on. It's been kind of one of those things that you got involved in it. It kept increasing in numbers, and you felt you had to do something to more or less protect them, because there basically isn't enough food, I don't think, naturally to support 125, which is about what's here today.
Today at Lake Else Lake, there are a number of residents who feed the swans. Judy Chrysler is one of those residents. She started in 1985.
And we moved in beside Lloyd Johnstone, and he's my inspiration for feeding the trumpeter swans here at Lake Else Lake, because that winter I learned that he fed the swans and has done so for many years. He has a small population that sit at the outlet of the creek that he has on his property, and he's been feeding the swans for many years.
Judy Chrysler was a neighbor of ours a few years back, and I was feeding them at that time, and she started to take an interest in it in those days.
When we moved to our own place in 1986, that winter of 1986, people were feeding the swans while the lake was open through the Christmas season, and when the lake started to freeze up over Christmas that year, I noticed there was a lot of swans around and nobody was feeding them anymore. So I, as a bird watcher, naturalist person, took it upon myself that winter to complete the year of feeding.
But the following year, the swans returned, and Chrysler began her daily routine in the winter of feeding the swans.
They came back, and I was hooked. I went out and bought some more barley, and the rest is history. It's been about 16 years of feeding swans now at Lake Else Lake. Yes, it was a real experience to have them come back the following year. Swans have long memories, and they do remember certain spots. I've worn the same coat for 16 years to go outside and feed them. And if I ever have to go away, I lend the coat to the person that's going to feed them, and they do feel more comfortable, it seems, with the person wearing the coat.
There's no doubt that feeding the trumpeter swans has become a passion for Chrysler. She and her husband buy 95 bags of corn annually, not to mention other grains, to feed the swans. She says it's a hobby.
When you start to feed the birds in the fall, you continue through the winter because they become to rely on the feeding station. So I'm out there every morning at about 8 o'clock or 8:30, just depending on the light of the day. Certainly the swans show up at 6:30 in the morning. You can hear them before light. And it's a commitment, like milking cows.
The odd thing about the experiences that both Chrysler and Johnstone share is that neither has a special relationship with individual swans that they feed.
A couple times we've had swans that have definite neck misalignments, if you will, for the very long neckline, and you think, well, from year to year that we should recognize them, but in fact I don't. The families come, there's a small group that come regularly every fall initially, and then as the winter builds into being more cold and more wintry, other swans do show up, but no, I can't say I recognize a swan year to year.
I can recognize only the odd one. Every year the adults kick out the young ones, and then the next year they come back, and so the 5 young ones that might be here this year with one of the adults will come back, and they'll come right in, and you know right away they were the 5 that you had last year that were young ones.
After 16 years of feeding the swans, Judy Chrysler has learned a lot about them. She understands their likes and their dislikes.
I know more about swans, and I'm quite privileged to be here on the water and have this opportunity to see them up close. They have become habituated to me, and over the years I know they've become closer and closer to the feeding experience. Initially they're quite shy, but over the winters and over the number of years they've become quite used to me, and I think it's because I wear the same coat. I'm steady Eddie, I'm here.
The flock that frequents Lloyd Johnstone's property isn't as big in number as a Chrysler spot further down the lake. But even in his 80s, Johnstone makes the trek out to the lake each morning around 9 to feed his swans.
And the ones that I feed now that leave here, say around the 1st of April to go north, they'll come back in the fall and they'll come in as a flock and they'll circle out over the house and land out in front and come walk right in, as much as to say, come and feed me, I'm back. They have a great memory of where they're going.
Johnstone says Chrysler and others have been instrumental in bolstering the trumpeter swans' numbers at Lake Else Lake. The swans have come a long way since the 1920s, when they were at the brink of extinction, to today when their numbers are 16,000 in North America.
As far as Judy's concerned, it's her whole life. I mean, out here at the lake, I mean, those swans mean more to her. To me, it's just something, a little bit of a tradition, and it's always nice to have a few of them around.
There are mornings that Judy Chrysler awakens and frowns at the thought of having to wander out in the cold to feed the swans. But she admits it only takes a moment for that thought to disappear.
Once I'm outside, it's just wonderful to be among the swans. And when they bring their young in and teach them how to eat the corn, I feel successful that way. And my husband and I have been doing it now for so many years. We'll have to figure out a way how to continue into our 80s like Lloyd and Lorraine.
That they have agreed to return the pole, and there should be a replica carved in Sweden in exchange. And the funding of shipment, I believe, is done by the Swedish government. When we saw the video when they first went over to Sweden, it was quite emotional to many people as to see something that we owned that far away from us.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Open Connection. The greatest distance in the existence of man is not from here to there, but the connection with mind and heart. If we can conquer that distance, we can soar like an eagle and realize our immensity within. I'm Robert Businesses.